All right, good evening, everyone. We're here on March 2nd. It's 5:02 p.m. I want to call the meeting to order and establish quorum. Tonight we have Christy Schmidt, Richard Senna, Courtney Darter Bruce, Dallas Pipes, Sarah Falconberry, and Carlin Fryer. First on the agenda is open session. I'd like to open it up to visitor comments and testimonials. Under District Policy BED Local, citizens may address the board by signing up before the meeting. The sign-up sheet for speakers is placed at the entrance to the boardroom, and speakers must sign in to be heard. Citizens may not address individual personnel concerns or other items that might infringe on the rights and privileges of others. And at this time, we will not have any guest speakers. Next on the agenda is budget workshop.
All right, so welcome back, everyone. You know, it seemed like I guess it was last Monday, we had our board meeting in February. All of a sudden, we turned into March. So today, March 2nd, we are having our budget workshop, and we are so fortunate that the timing worked out for our demographers to be here in person and present. Dr. O'Hare works very closely with our demographers, and so I'm going to have him do the introduction and then hand it over.
Sure. Thank you. So we've got Chris Poole and Caroline Couch here with PASA, which is Population and Survey Analysts. Chris is our new team lead from PASA. If you remember, we had Stacy Tapera for the last couple of years. I believe she got promoted, right?
I think the scheduling wasn't quite right this
There
year.
you go. So we've got Chris and Caroline here. This is, if you remember what we do with our demographic studies, we do a full study every 2 years and then a mini update in the in-between years. So this is our full study year. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris and Caroline.
Okay, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here with you guys tonight. We will both be sort of tag teaming the presentation here. It's a little long, but we were told to sort of take our time and walk you guys through this. I think most of you have a binder there, so we're going to try to hit the high points, and we'll try to reference as we go some of the areas that you can be looking at if you want more detail, because there's quite a bit of detail in there. So, and we'll get started here with all of our bright shining faces. You'll only see the two of us probably, but I know a lot of the administration has dealt with more than just the two of us, of course. We like to show everybody here because almost everybody works on every single project. And so we need you guys to understand that there's a big team behind this, and it takes a team effort to produce that binder. And so we are thrilled to be helping the district. And if you guys have any other questions or anything else that you need, we are happy to point you to the right person. I'm going to start with just a little bit of an understanding or a bit of a walkthrough of the demographic study process, because the process itself takes about 4 months from start to finish. And so we began the project back in the fall, of course. And the very first thing that we do is collect background data. Even though we've worked for the district several times, everything is constantly changing. And so we can rarely rely on the information that we gathered the last time. We have to go regather that information and see what is different. And so a lot of that background data collection is in building a really robust GIS map. There are maps in the front parts of your binders. There are much larger maps in detail that we brought to the district. And these maps are so very important for us to all understand and be on the same page of where all of these developments are occurring, where they're going to turn into kiddos, and what you all may be needing for new facilities. We download data from the appraisal districts. You know, we're looking at water and sewer. Of course, that's also very, very important for you guys. And at this point, we have appraisal district data for several years. And so one of the things that we do that's very important is we can look parcel by parcel and see which of these parcels have changed hands in the last year. Because sometimes it's to family members, and sometimes it's to now an LLC that's going to turn for development. And so that helps us understand and pinpoint some of these that might not really be on anybody's radar yet, but that we can go try to talk to the new owners and understand what the plans are. We geocode the student population, and so you've probably seen that before. They'll pop up like little dots. There's a map of them here in a minute. But since we now have several sets of that data, we can also go in and look, say, at your existing subdivisions and understand and try to get at K through 4, how K through 4 in 1 year aged up to 1st through 5th the next year. Are you gaining kids? Are you losing kids? What's going on in some of these subdivisions that aren't maybe necessarily the new ones? And so the ratios of, the geocoding of the student population is very important because that's really our base level data for you guys, and we're going to be building on top of that. But one of the most important things that we do with those geocoded students is we develop a ratio of students per home. Because so many of the times we'll talk to somebody and they say, well, that new house, it's going to have 2 kids in it. Well, maybe not, because the ratio is much, much lower than that, because I've got 2 kids, but they're in their 20s. And so my home, if you were counting and comparing kids to homes, my home counts as a 0. The home next, a couple doors down from us, the same way. A couple doors down from us on the same side of the street, there's 4 kids, but they're all in their 30s and 40s. And so the ratio ends up being much, much lower, and it's very important this year for you guys. We're going to spend a little time talking about that. We will talk quite a bit about alternative educational opportunities. That is something that has really become such an important thing for all of our clients. That's what we've decided to call them. This is other places where parents are choosing to send their kids to school. That can be homeschooling, it's virtual schools, it's charter schools, it's private schools, it's micro schools. I mean, you name it. It's all of these different things that parents are doing these days. And so that definitely impacts the ratios of students per home that I just mentioned. And of course, what you guys are going to need to be doing with your facilities. Then we spend a lot of time in the district. We have several people that come to the district, and we have to study the housing and the economic trends in the area. I know there are rooftops coming out of the ground. I know you guys know that. And so it's very important for us to be here and understand all of those details. We have somebody that drives all of the subdivisions that are presently developing and helps us understand how quickly they're going. And then Caroline spent time in the district and, of course, got the 3-hour tour from Mr. Sena that it seems as though it's maybe infamous or famous, one of the two. I'm not sure which. But then, of course, also met with several people from the city of Fair Oaks, from the city of Bernie, from Kendall County, from Bexar County. They provided some resources. And so that's all been very helpful, of course. We generate district-wide projections under 3 different scenarios of growth, and we'll talk in detail about a couple of those. And then we, of course, look at long-range planning, because that's really why we are all here, is we have to understand what that means for your facilities in the long run. So we'll move on to a little bit of information just to sort of set the stage. We'll start with some of the TEA data that we can get. And so this is for your ESC Region 20. And so this is growth between 2019 and 2024. And we've highlighted you guys in yellow up there. It goes only through 2024 because we can't get at the rest of the data for 2025-26 until probably April, May is when it will all come out and we can generate this same sort of map. But we have you guys highlighted in yellow there. And so on the left-hand side, you've got numeric growth. On the right-hand side, you've got percent growth. And so you can see on the left-hand side, I know that's very small, but what we're interested in is just the colors. All of this information is in Chapter 1 there in your binder if you're interested to study it in more detail. But the blue area that is just south of you guys really goes in the south from Harlandale up to Northside and Northeast. And in the blue, that's where they're seeing losses. And for Northside and Northeast, sometimes thousands of students lost in the last 5 years. And yet you guys are part of this sort of ring of growth, bit of growth with Comal and with Medina Valley and East Central. East Central is a client of ours, growing outside of that major metro area. And that's what we're seeing for all of our clients that are surrounding this major metro areas in the state. There's loss typically inside those major metro areas, and that growth is all being pushed out in sort of a ring of growth outside the district. So Bernie ISD in the region falls third when we're looking at actual numbers gained between 2019 and 2024. And then on the right-hand side, when you look at the percent growth, then of course it's easier for smaller districts to hop in. They'll have some gain, and then since they have a smaller population to start with, that percent of increase ends up being higher. And so Leakey ISD, Natalia ISD, and some of these others hop in there. But even then, Bernie is holding its own, being sixth with the percent growth in the region. This is what that growth has looked like a little bit over the past 10 years or so. You can see that on the left-hand side, over the last 5 years, we're looking at a gain of about 1,500 kids, and over the 10 years, about 3,200 kids. So it's really similar when you're looking at that, the first 5 years and the last 5 years that we've been looking at. On the right-hand side, it breaks it down by year. And so that little tiny bar right there, that's for 2020, of course, was COVID. And the state as a whole lost about 2.1% of the student population from students staying home, from kindergartners delaying until the next year, from homeschooling, et cetera, et cetera. And there were not very many districts in the state that actually gained students. You guys gained a handful. You gained 38 during that year. And so that kind of puts you in rarefied air. But then you, again, in 21, you have this enormous rebound there. We got a lot going on in 21. We had really low interest rates. We had the rebound of kids from 2020. We probably had some immigration coming in that situation. And so we have to sort of balance those two out all of the time. But nonetheless, you can see that that large increase there was 710 students for you guys. But over time, in the last couple of years, it has tapered off a little bit, and we're going to talk about some of those reasons. Now, one of the things that we talk a lot about around our office is kindergarten enrollment and birth data. And you've probably heard news articles and news stories about birth rates and the birth rates declining globally in a lot of countries and in the state of Texas. What we can get at, we can't knock on doors and say how many, it's important to us because that means how many kindergartners you're going to have 5 years later. And so we can't knock on doors and say, have you got a 3-year-old inside your home? But what we can do is we can get at the births by zip code of the birth mother. And the zip codes don't exactly line up with the district, so we do work with some population points to try to smooth that out and get at good data. But then we take the births, move them forward 5 years, and graph them, and that's what you see here. And so right now you guys have kindergarten enrollment in excess of your birth rate. And so what that means, of course, is that somebody moves into the district with a 3-year-old, and that 3-year-old was not born there, but that's why you're getting that in-migration, that difference between the blue line at the bottom and the green line at the top. And over the last handful of years, that has widened quite a bit. So you're getting more kiddos that are moving in when they're 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 than are actually being born here. But this last year, the birth rate was 2 potential students different from last year to this year. However, your kindergarten enrollment went down. And so what happened is those two lines converged a little bit. And that happens over time, and it's happening a lot faster and a lot more commonly now. As an area builds out, what we see is that that kindergarten enrollment comes and it meets the birth rate and then actually drops below the birth rate because not every child that's born in the district ends up enrolling in the district. But you guys aren't there yet, but what we're seeing is that those numbers for a lot of our clients are really beginning to converge because parents are choosing to send their kids elsewhere. But overall, the birth rate and the kindergarten enrollment still is trending upward. And if you look at the bottom of that screen, you can see the ESC Region 20 and the state of Texas, you can see a downward trend. And so that's what we're seeing for an awful lot of our clients. And if you're paying really close attention, you will notice that the kindergarten enrollment for both of those is below the birth rate, just like I was talking about. And so you guys are definitely bucking the trend in the area right now. That's one of the reasons that you guys are red on those maps that I just showed. So we'll move on and talk a little bit about past and current students. And so these are the geocoded kiddos that are enrolled in the district. We download data from the district, and we have somebody that painstakingly tries to get at absolutely where everybody is living. You know, you'll go into a place to buy something and they'll ask for your zip code. We do not geocode to the zip code. We try to get down as close as possible to where every single child is living because it's important for you guys. And so this is 23 in gray and 25, 26 in red. So everywhere you see a red dot is where you didn't have a child enrolled in Boerne ISD in 23, 24. And sometimes for some of our clients, it's very apparent where their growth is coming from. You guys kind of have growth everywhere. It's pretty diffuse, and you got those little red dots just popping up absolutely everywhere. So it looks just a little bit at your historical enrollment because we have to understand what's been going on in the district in the last handful of years. And so this is kind of confusing when you start to look at it, but what we did is we went from kindergarten through 8th grade and 10th grade through 12th grade for every year, and we color-coded those cohorts by size. We'll leave out 9th grade because for a lot of clients that's the largest, and you know, we leave out EE and pre-K. But what you can see is that your current 11th grade is really, really large. But if you can watch them, and when, you know, all the way back in 2018, when they were like 4th graders, that bulge of kiddos has sort of moved through. And so that's important for us just to understand is that when that current 11th grade class moves out, it's going to be maybe a little bit larger than normal class that's moving out, and it will have to be offset by your kindergarten class that's coming in. And so sometimes you can see either big gains or big losses just by graduating your 12th graders out and replacing them with kindergartners. But the another couple of things stand out to me here. And that's how diffuse the sort of red is in the secondary grade levels for the, say, 22 through present. And we're seeing this for an awful lot of clients also, is that the smallest cohorts that are in a lot of the districts are the kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade. I think because it's a whole lot easier to send or to either homeschool your child, if it's kindergarten, first grade, second grade, or to send them to some of these other alternative educational opportunities, and yet they seem to come back into the districts, we think is kind of what's going on when they start playing sports, or when they start taking German and mom or dad can't teach that, or when they start, it's physics. It's one thing to teach addition at the kitchen table, but it's a whole nother ballgame to teach physics at the kitchen table. And so we are allowing that density in sort of the secondary levels to sort of continue on in some of the projections. The third and final thing here that's interesting to me is how low the kindergarten classes have been compared to all of the rest of the cohorts in the last couple of 3 years. You had other small classes in 2018 and 2016 and so forth, but those really tiny kindergarten classes have to be offset by those 12th grade classes, and they will work their way through the system, and we'll have to see if more enough of that density comes in later on to bring those class sizes back up a little bit. Sure.
Let's take a look at, let's take a look at 2021 kindergarten. There was 578. So in 21-22, that would have been first grade, correct?
Right, yes.
And so that particular grade has gone from 578 to 680 to 723 to 736 to 778. That is substantial increases. Would that be because of move-ins or?
It is move-ins, and it is potentially people coming from not homeschooling or not doing other things, but you happen to pick the one that is probably the lowest because of COVID. That 578 was fall of 2020. And so they gained like 100 kids when they turned into first graders that following year. And so yes, over time, of course, all those homes that you're building are those kiddos that are moving in when they're 8 years old and enrolling in Bernie ISD. Right. Yes, they don't all move in when they're 3 years old, absolutely. Yeah. And so that is also built into the modeling too, is the cohort. Some districts will have an inordinate number of kindergarten classes, private kindergartens that were, say, taught at a church or something like that. And so you'll have a big jump from kindergarten to first grade. And so that's normally the biggest one. And then of course you get into the high school where you have a lot of oddity going on. But we have to look at that from that attrition and retention level from grade level in 1 year to the next grade level and see how things are going.
I was just noticing kind of a little trend from freshman year to senior year, especially this cohort of seniors. The drop-off seems like their freshman year seems like we get obviously the bulk of them, but that continuous drop-off is it's interesting to me because I almost expect an inverse of that, but obviously that's not the case.
Well, then, like if you look at the current 12th graders and go back to when they were 9th graders, you can see the difference between when they were 8th graders to 9th graders. So you probably gained some that probably could have gone on to 10th grade. And so that's why we normally leave the 9th graders out, is there ends up being so much oddity there in the 9th grade level that sometimes those kids don't end up moving on to 10th grade. They stay 9th graders for a while due to the number of credits that they have and all of that sort of thing.
So if we have 30, 40 kids that are graduating earlier, 50, that explains why the senior number is lower.
Are we good to go on? Okay, so then I mentioned the ratio of students per household earlier, and that is literally, we have a lot of people ask sometimes, how do you develop that? It is literally the number of occupied homes and the number of kids enrolled in Bernie ISD. And so far from being 2 per home, it is 0.45 for you guys right now. And so you can see, though, we began our first data set collection for you all in the fall of 2019, and it was 0.50, and that's a pretty substantial decrease. And we are seeing that for every single one of our clients that I've worked for this fall has gone down at least 0.02 students on average in 1 year's time. So we did not gather data when we do an update for you all. We don't go in and gather ratios data. We geocode the students, look at some housing things and so forth. So presently it's a 0.45. 2 years ago when we last gathered that data, it was a 0.47. So it's gone down that 0.02 over 2 years' time. But we kept digging for you guys a little bit, and we're going to start doing this same analysis for a lot of our clients. that it's a 0.47 right now for your it's a 0.45 average. For your existing subdivisions, it is a 0.47. And for your developing subdivisions, it's a 0.38. And so for those developing subdivisions, you're getting quite a few fewer students that are enrolling in Bernie ISD when they come in and occupy that home and walk in the door. And 2 years ago, when we looked at that same thing, you also had 0.47 students in existing homes, but you had 0.44 in developing. Wow. So 2 years ago, it was 0.44 in developing, and now it's 0.38 in developing. And so that changes what we do. When we project a home, we also project a ratio that is specific, we think, to that subdivision, to that home. And that number has gone down. It's lower than what we would have expected it to be 2 years ago.
You know, it was interesting. I noticed there's a few subdivisions that are about 6, 7 years old now near Fair Oaks Ranch Elementary. And I remember always being shocked at the small number of kids in Stonehaven and Cielo Ranch. Not to get too granular here, but it'd be interesting to see when we study this with planning units, whether, and I remember walking through those neighborhoods, they have a lot of strollers. Right, and I was wondering, are they buying homes with preschool kids? Mm-hmm. And is that changing now? So it'll be interesting to see those, because the fastest selling subdivisions are those at the low end of the economic spectrum. And those are the ones that are more likely to have small kids.
Right. And so we do look at that. We break down, for every planning unit, we do break down the number of kids by grade. And we look at the number of kids by grade in the last couple of years and have looked at, are they gaining in kindergartners, even if they're existing subdivisions? Are they gaining in kindergartners, gaining in first graders because of that very phenomenon that even though the homes have been occupied, that 3-year-old finally turned into a kindergartner? Is there another question?
Mine was similar to his, of that it's the current students per home, but those new builds are younger families with younger children. Right. So it was just echoing what he had to say.
But the point there was that it's lower than it was even 2 years ago. It's quite a bit lower than it was 2 years ago. And so you can see how it varies widely, though. You know, we say that it's a 0.45, but then we throw that number away. We don't ever use that number as something that we would assign to a projected new home. You've got Pecan Springs at a 0.73, Mira Lomas at a 0.13, and so that's a huge difference. And so it's very detailed. It's in the Appendix 1, if you're interested in looking at that. We have for all of the subdivisions that we have a ratio developed, and you can take a look at that ratio and see what we're using. But we do have the ability to waterfall that ratio a little bit to let it grow over time and to be able to put some density into some of these existing homes that are doing exactly what we're talking about. And then one of the most important things that we have to study right now, and we have a couple of people that are more or less spend a ton of time on understanding alternative educational opportunities. And my gosh, with the voucher system, it is like it is a moving target every single day of the week. Our group chats and they're constantly getting pinged with new articles and new information about what is going on with all of that. But we have termed everything that is not Bernie ISD as an alternative educational opportunity. So that's charter schools, private schools, like I mentioned, virtual schools, micro schools, and homeschooling. And so anything that is not a is not a charter school or a virtual school that is run by TEA is very difficult to get at, because the state, of course, doesn't track homeschooling numbers. And so what we do is we can get information from TEA for charter schools and for numbers out to other ISDs. You guys are not very impacted by charter schools. An awful lot of our clients that are suburban are beginning to be so, because the charter schools have started more in the urban areas and they have moved outward, and they sort of market themselves as free private schools. That's really sort of the feel and everything, and the ads with the blazers and the columns and the fronts of the schools and these sorts of things. So in that regard, you are not very impacted. Charter schools can drop into the district and really change things very, very quickly. But we do have the closure of Oaks Academy, we think could bring about 26 kids back into the district, and then Kai Bernie is going to be opening, but that is going to be small numbers, because a lot of times those are set in some way to partner with a treatment facility of some sort, and so we're not expecting a big impact of that. We do go through the charter amendments every year by TEA, They're not very good because a lot of times they will say we have the ability to open a new school in this general area. And what we find is that proximity is important because they don't provide transportation. And so, but we do go through those as best we can, and we're not aware of any additional charter schools that we would expect to impact you guys in the next couple of 3 years. You can see the proximity that you have, the schools that are in Navy, there are dots. So there are charter schools around, and you are losing some students to charter schools, but the biggest impact for you guys is private schools. And so there is some movement for those. There's a new Montessori, Pinnacle Montessori, that's going to be opening up. Crestmont and Ambleside were both moving into new facilities and therefore going to have extra space. And Ambleside is interested, apparently, in adding high school grades. We think that we were told that they had one ninth grader that was interested this year that actually kind of showed up at the beginning of school, but as they were the only ninth grader, they chose to go someplace else. And so then also that St. Peter is adding grades. And then Castle Hill, there's a university model, but it's further away from you guys. It's new. It's possible that it could impact you, but very, very small. As of February the 9th, there were 194 San Antonio area schools that have been approved for TIFA funds. And so somewhere in the range of 9 to 11 of those have, we think, an impact on you guys. We contact all of the private schools. We talk to them. The data is not necessarily good because they don't always know exactly where their clients, their students are coming from. And sometimes they don't really want to talk to us. We're working for the enemy, or we feel like a telemarketer of some sort. They're suspicious, but we do contact them and try to get at that. And then there is quite a bit. There's an entire section, chapter 2, in the book, and then the appendix for chapter 2 actually has a separate sort of a pullout that looks specifically at all of this information and has quite a bit of detail. So I would highly encourage you if you're interested, because we are updating it every single day, especially with with the voucher things that are coming on. So I would highly encourage you to take a look at that. Homeschooling, we are always asked about homeschooling, and I kind of alluded to this earlier. The numbers that we've been told is as many as 1 in 10 of the students that are in the state of Texas may be homeschooling, but we cannot get at that number. We've looked at some geofencing. There's a company that's interested in doing some geofencing and stuff and trying to get at some of those numbers, but they're going to be fluid at best. And so none of this accounts for homeschooling. The way homeschooling is built into this is in the lower ratios. So if you had no kids that were homeschooling, those ratios would be higher. And so I can't tell you how many kids you do have that are homeschooling, but I can tell you that the ratios are where they are, and one of the reasons that they are where they are is because of those homeschool kids. Now this screen looks just at TEA schools. These are kiddos that are going out to charters in blue, out to other school districts, other TEA school districts in red, and then virtual schools. And so, of course, virtual schools weren't much of a thing much before COVID, but the percent increases of the virtual school students now are really large because that has really come on in the number of years since COVID. That sort of snaky line across the bottom, that is your transfers in from other places, and this does go through 24-25. Do remember that, because we can't get at all of that data for another couple of months. But again, as you see, even though you see those increases in kids to charters, other ISDs, and virtual schools, you can see that green bar increasing in size. The number outs are still larger than the numbers in that are coming in that bottom line there. And then when we sum it up, you guys saw a similar number, I think, a couple of years ago. These are our best estimates when we've gone through the whole entire process of trying to track down your kiddos. And so we think that sort of your capture rate of kids in Bernie ISD is about 88%. And so you can see about 9.8% of the students we think that live in the confines of Bernie ISD are attending private school. The charters, the virtuals, and the other ISDs are still small numbers. That charter school number could change quickly with a charter school or two coming closer or inside the confines of the district. And then everybody always asks me, how does that compare to anybody else, that 87.7%? And so it's hard to say, because we can only get at this information for our clients, but I'm sure you guys probably are aware of Katy ISD west of Houston, Frisco ISD north of Dallas. Those are long-term, well-regarded districts that are suburban, and they run about 90%. As a capture rate. When we look at Dallas ISD several years ago, when we've done work for Houston ISD, a lot of times those are running in the 70s because they're so impacted by charters and they're impacted by really large private schools too.
I have a question.
Sure.
What percentage would you say of kids attend Bernie schools due to an address or something and not living in the actual district?
not living in the actual district. I don't have that number in front of me, but they all came in as, in your data set. I don't know a number, but we go ahead and geocode them as popping up like that. So I don't know the number. It was a couple of hundred.
So they would show up in the attending resident in district?
They would be the transfers into BISD. It's actually right there. It's 146.
Okay.
They
Okay.
would be
So
the ones that-
146, yeah. So
They're transferring in. They're the dot outside the district, and they're coming in for various
Thank you.
reasons. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Caroline.
All right. Good evening, everybody. It's nice to be here. Real quick, just before I hop into this, just to remind everyone, everything I'm going to be talking about is going to be in Chapter 3 in your binder. That's the housing section. The second thing I always like to touch on is that everything I'm going to be talking about is just housing, not students. So that's an important reminder before I get into it. Oh, Chris, can you hear me? All right, so just to kick off the housing section, this is just a quick glance at the housing market in the entire San Antonio, New Braunfels MSA. Your mortgage rates remain elevated. They're still above 6% as of December 2025. And despite several Federal Reserve rate cuts since late 2024, and this is continuing to impact affordability across the state and across the country. At the same time, the year-over-year sales have slowed to 7.24%. Median prices have declined from about $313,000 to $310,000, and inventory has risen to a little over 5 months. This is reflecting a little bit more of a balanced market. But if rates ease in 2026, as they are anticipated, we could see some renewed momentum in both buyer activity and any stalled developments in the district. So to begin understanding PASA's projections, we start with our planning unit framework for Boerne ISD. So each planning unit can range from a small or a very large geographical area built around your major roads, your attendance zones, and parcel boundaries. These units link housing activity and student enrollment, and it allows us to project growth at a very detailed level. There's nearly 100 units across the district, and the structure helps us to track how development and enrollment shifts over time, and it supports really accurate data-driven facility planning for you guys. So over the next decade, the most impactful single-family developments in Boerne ISD, which are classified here as ones that are projected to add 200 or more homes to the district, these will serve as the primary drivers of residential and enrollment growth. In total, single-family housing will account for 71.5% of all projected new occupancies in the district. Esperanza remains the largest contributor with more than 1,600 additional homes projected and continued phased development supported by ongoing infrastructure improvements. Additionally, Corley Farms and Cordillera Ranch also represent major growth anchors, while ranches at Creekside and Regent Park have provided more moderate contributions. In the other portions of the district, communities like George's Ranch, Miralomas, and Tapatio Springs, they do add to overall growth, but at a much more measured pace due to site conditions and infrastructure considerations. Now, collectively, these developing and planned subdivisions will shape both the geographic pattern and the timing of single-family growth across Boerne ISD over the next 10 years. So building on that overview, these are the 5 largest single-family subdivisions shaping growth in BISD over the next decade. So as mentioned, Esperanza leads the way with the project expecting to reach 2,900 homes at final build-out. This master plan community north of Highway 46 continues to expand their new phases. They are currently underway, and they're working on a connecting roadway that will further enhance access to the community. Corley Farms is projected to add more than 800 homes as Syntex and Pulte continue to build new phases west of their existing sections. Cordillera Ranch contributes over 700 additional homes with activity continuing across multiple sections, including some new occupancies in the Springs and additional home sites now beginning their construction. Ranches at Creekside is expected to add nearly 600 homes with new plats being submitted for expansion south of its current development. And finally, Regent Park is projected to add more than 400 homes with future phases being anticipated in the western portion of the site. Together, these 5 communities account for a significant share of the district's projected single-family growth and will remain key drivers of enrollment over the next 10 years.
Yeah, just to add, as by virtue of the fact that these are existing subdivisions, water is not an issue.
Right.
They have water.
Yes. Just continuing with single-family growth, these heat maps illustrate how development is distributed across the district over time. So in the first half of the projection period on the left-hand side, growth is broadly distributed rather than centered in one location. The activity is aligning kind of close with your major transportation corridors. We see development extending east and west along Highway 46 and south along I-10. Esperanza and Corley Farms clearly stand out as the primary growth centers, collectively adding more than 1,100 homes in the early years. Cordillera Ranch also contributes meaningful growth along the eastern edge of the district, though because of its lower density and multi-planning unit layout, it makes that growth appear much more spread out. On the western side, north of Highway 46, you have Miralomas and Tapatio Springs continue to add homes just at that lower intensity. Then looking at the full 10-year horizon shown on the right-hand side, the pattern remains corridor-based but becomes much more geographically dispersed. Smaller developments like Regent Park, ranches at Creekside, Lily Ranch, and George's Ranch, along with lots of other scattered infill projects, these will add incremental growth across multiple areas. Over time, this phased expansion fans outward east, south, and west, resulting in more even distribution of single-family development while still reinforcing the importance of those corridors. Now, transitioning from single-family to multifamily development, this just highlights where new apartment development is occurring and how it fits into the district's overall housing picture. So the most impactful projects in the near term are Bluff View and the Calvert. Both are working on leasing. Together, they are expected to add just under 600 units in the next 12 to 18 months. This is representing the most significant concentration of multifamily growth within the forecast period. Also important to note that Bluffview's use of TDHCA tax credits positions this as a more affordable rental option, so it's likely to support really strong lease-up given regional demand for lower-cost housing. Now, geographically, multifamily development in Boerne ISD is concentrated in the central portion of the district along the I-10 and Highway 46 areas. These are areas with established infrastructure, employment access, and retail, and that's typically where we see multifamily development happen in districts like yours. That pattern continues in the pipeline with 6 projects currently in planning, and we've also identified additional sites as likely for future multifamily development. Now, there are several planned projects embedded within master plan communities like Esperanza and Corley Farms and Spencer Ranch, and this reflects a broader trend toward mixed-use housing types within large-scale developments, but these projects are not anticipated to begin their multifamily developments anytime in the near future, so those are still out in the projection period for a while. Finally, the Vistas is also under development, but this is an age-restricted project, so it will add units, but it is not expected to generate students for the district. Now, as we begin to wrap up the housing section, this just summarizes your full 10-year outlook for the district. Over the next decade, Boerne ISD is projected to add approximately 18,000 new housing occupancies. That annual production will rise into the early 2030s before moderating out a little bit towards the end of the period. Single-family housing clearly remains the dominant driver, accounting for a little over 13,000 units, or 71.5% of the total growth. Multifamily represents a meaningful but much secondary share at around 4,400 units, or 24%, while age-restricted housing makes up a very small portion at just over 4%. Build-to-rent and manufactured housing play an extremely minimal role in the overall housing mix as well. Now, just to summarize up everything I've just mentioned, basically Boerne ISD remains in a high growth phase with development projected to rise steadily throughout the projection period before generally moderating. Again, 75% of all new housing and the majority of future student growth will come from single-family developments. And again, they will be led by these large master plan communities like I've mentioned. The district's pipeline remains deep with dozens of active planned and potential subdivisions supporting a sustained momentum over the next 10 years. Multifamily development plays a smaller secondary role, contributing just under 1/4 of the total projected units. A lot of that activity still will be concentrated around I-10 and Highway 46 and will be tied to some of those mixed-use products like I mentioned. Finally, while growth remains corridor-oriented, it is shaped by real-world constraints, particularly water availability, topography, floodplains, and conservation easements and lands. These will continue to influence timing, location, and pace of development, and ultimately your long-term enrollment patterns in Bernie ISD. And so with that, I'll turn things back over to Chris to talk about your students.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So we will begin this here by looking at what we had projected for the previous study, because you guys came in a little bit under that. We projected 11,397, and you came in at 11,178, a little bit over 200 students difference. And so the reason for those are really, we think, sort of bulleted out there on the right-hand side. The housing numbers were quite close, but we have talked about the fact that the ratios of students in those homes was lower than might have been expected. Also, the kindergarten class, the birth rate should have held steady. It was 2 students or 2 potential students different, and your kindergarten class did come down. Now, you know, we talk about ratios and we talk about births and we talk about alternative educational opportunities, and so many of these other things wrap into that lower ratio of students per home. It's not that one, you know, they all sort of group together to result in that. And so those two things both together, we had projected, I think it was 649 661 kindergartners, and you guys came in the 640s. Then another thing that we haven't talked about here that I think did impact you guys a bit is the Hispanic student population. And this isn't something that we're normally studying and looking at, breaking out specifically into ethnic subpopulations. But in our Houston area districts, we saw for some of them an enormous decline in the number of Hispanic students. A couple of them, for example, were, you know, typically gaining 1,000 or 1,300 Hispanic students a year, and then now they've lost this year 800 Hispanic students. And so that swing is a couple of thousand students, and it was a huge, their enrollment numbers took a huge hit. And for you guys, you had been gaining an average since 2016 of about 178 Hispanic students per year, and that came in at 40 this year. And so there have to be some sorts of impacts going on, but we have to study it by individual client, because I just studied that for a different client that I fully expected to be impacted by that, and it didn't seem to change at all. So we do think, though, that 140 differential there definitely played into that difference of about 200 students there. And then that last bullet point is the students in developing subdivisions that I mentioned, about a 2% drop there. So this next slide just shows a little bit about summation of sort of all of the factors that go into the student projections. At the 12 o'clock position really is new housing construction. It's still projected to gain or to add 500 to 800 students per year based on those new homes. So your births are still up, but your kindergarten class this year didn't quite reflect that, and so we're going to have to continue to watch that. But due to those births, we would still expect an increase in kindergarten population over time. Aging of the student population is important. Are you losing kiddos, like that 11th grade class that's going to step out and be replaced by a smaller kindergarten class? In and out migration, we showed the bar there of how many kids are coming in from other places versus how many are going out to other places. Regeneration of established neighborhoods, that's one thing that we have to look at that I mentioned a little bit earlier. Those established neighborhoods, the ones that aren't gaining new homes, actually lost 97 students for you guys last year, and it's for everybody right now, because everybody in those existing homes, nobody wants to move and give up that 3% mortgage that they had. And so everybody is really holding put. We've beat those alternative educational opportunities to death, but that is certainly a big thing for you guys. And then, of course, economy. That's always a very, very important thing. People don't qualify and buy new homes very often if they're unsteady in their jobs. So we do every single year come back and reset the paradigm. And we try to understand a primary scenario of growth, a low growth, and a high growth, accelerated and reduced, are really the numbers that we use there, the names that we use there. You can see that primary scenario of growth in the dashed line, and you can see the accelerated and the reduced in the blue and the green. Now, the green, that reduced, is a bigger delta than is the blue. And so what we would see in that sort of situation is where if we would see a charter school or two drop into the Bernie ISD proper, because when that happens, then it may fill up almost overnight and pull students away from Bernie ISD. So if we see that, or if we see the voucher program become much more robust, you are primed and ready with some of your schools having just moved to different places that may afford them additional space. And so I know that the district has been using that reduced scenario, and we're going to talk a little bit about that here in the future. But what you can see is continued gain, of course. We're projecting under that primary scenario of growth about 5 years out to be about 13,372 students. and then 10 years out at 16,500. Now, we know that the 10 years out is much less likely to occur than those first handful of years, but it takes so long to get a secondary campus on the ground that we want to project and know where we think we're headed, because it's 2 years to build that school. You got to site it, you got to design it, you got to get the bond money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we concentrate on those first few years, but we do go ahead and look on out there to that 10-year time frame. So we have that data into our planning units. For each planning unit, we have projections by grade group for every year of the 10 years of the projection period. And so then we can join them back together and put them into your attendance zones and do planning. Now, I do want to mention here quickly the difference between resident students or geocoded students that I've showed you and enrolled students, because you do have kids that transfer between schools in the district. And so generally, the maps that we have, that we create, are based on resident students. But at the table, when we have an accompanying table, we normally try to incorporate the number of transfer students between schools in the district. And so the tables are enrolled students. So just, be aware when you're looking and trying to compare numbers there. So this shows resident students, and their color. These are your current elementary attendance zones, and it shows the expected gain in red. They're color-coded by the expected gain. And so we got Faber and Kendall gaining more than 500 students over that 10-year time frame, and Viola Wilson more than 400 students over that 10-year time frame. And so then the numbers that are shown here are the sort of the midpoint, that 5-year part, and then the 10-year time frame there at the end of the projection period. And so Faber and Kendall could be, and Viola Wilson, over 1,000 students, really Faber over 1,200 students at the 10-year time frame. And all of the capacities, of course, are 800, except for Curington, which is 700 students. And so you can see that it's that southern western portion where there's going to be the most need for additional facilities. However, every single one of these is expected to grow. If anybody was expected to lose, it would be blue, and there is no blue here. Curington, Harf, all of these are expected to grow over time. When we look at the levels of utilization, we've got the midpoint in the left-hand side for the fall of 30. We've got the end point of the projection period for the fall of 35. And that utilization level is so important. A lot of our clients understand that when a district is growing, they may need to put some portable buildings on the ground if they have space for them. That's always, of course, something that's very important to consider. And so they understand that that's a tool. Most of them don't like them, but they understand that that's a tool that a growing district ends up using. However, at some point in time, the kids from outside have to come in and have to eat lunch, and they have to go to the library, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can't continue to put an unending number of portable buildings out there. And so our clients typically tell us that 120% of capacity, more or less, depending on the school, is sort of where they really need to have another facility on ground so that they're not having lunch at 10 o'clock in the morning and at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so that's why you'll see anything in bright red here is when we are seeing something in excess of 120% of capacity. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's just a sort of a understanding of really where we really need to be looking at new facility space. And so on the left-hand side, in 5 years, nothing is red. Yay. That's a good thing. But we do have Faber at 114%, Kendall at 107, Fair Oaks Ranch at 114. So it's not that there won't be pressure based on the resident students, but maybe it won't be quite enough, and maybe it will be something that we'll be able to continue to watch. Even Curington and Cibolo Creek are in the 70s, 76, 77% of capacity. And then by the fall of 35, of course, Faber could be at 152% based on that primary scenario of growth.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all understand that by 35, we're going to need to add an elementary school. Where I think we're in good shape is that when you look at the elementary schools that are going to be 115%, 120%, though our road mobility in this community stinks, there are ways to tweak attendance zones. And I think that's where the plan unit breakdown is really, really good, because you can take a look at the Faber zone where there's going to be a lot of new construction, not so much in Curington, and you could envision a scenario where there are some planning units currently in Faber which are equidistant to Curington. Same thing for Herf Cibolo. So I think we can modify our attendance zones, and we'll need your help on that too. You provided some good help when we did our last rezoning. And so I think that'll help us smooth things out, because it's hard to justify having one school that's 60% full and another one that's 100%.
Right.
You want to be efficient across the board.
And also, when it comes to the opening of a new facility, the cluster of red in one spot can actually be really good, because that means that by one facility, we can grab a little from here, a little from there, and a little from someplace else, and try to help all of those at one time. Once we have put your transfers in, and you don't have huge transfer numbers at the elementary level, some of our clients have enormous bilingual programs that they're clustering in one spot or another that may mean 175 students leave one school and go to another. But once we put the transfers in, you can see anything that is in sort of that peach color is above 100%. Anything that is red is above 120% of capacity. And so the good news is nothing in that first 5 years is red, okay? And this is based on that primary scenario of growth, that moderate scenario of growth. And so we can see that we're not beginning to really hit that until about 2031. You can see that at the end of the projection period, we are projecting about 7,400 elementary students compared to a 6,300 student capacity. And so if you build one school, you need kind of 1.5-ish schools by the end of the projection period, based on this sort of thing right here, depending on how much zoning is redone between facilities there. But the good news is nothing in the short term. But we did go ahead and look at what would happen under that reduced enrollment scenario. And the good news is the red goes away. And so we don't have any of the facilities that are 120, but we do have Faber at 118. We've got Kendall at 110, and so that's not nothing. But it is giving you, under that reduced scenario, the possibility that if things flatten out quite a bit, keep flattening out quite a bit, that may end up getting pushed off toward the end. That reduced scenario does show about 5,700 students in 6,300 student capacity, and so that would really keep that number down there in something manageable.
I just had, if you can go back. I mean, looking at these capacity numbers, these don't align with some other capacity numbers that we've seen, and I'm trying to see if we can figure that out, because I definitely remember seeing Fabra at 700 when they were there at 711 last year. Different capacity numbers, because I know whenever we brought down Viola Wilson, we were going up to 800 as kind of a standard, and that was moving the bar up. But looking at this number, every elementary school capacity is 800 except for Currington. Can we shine some light on that? Like Cibolo Creek at 800 would, like, that's really interesting to me.
This has been an ongoing question for a number of years. These seem to be pretty consistent with what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years. A number of years ago, the figure of 900 was thrown out, which was totally false, but that was assuming that band, music, art, gifted and talented challenge lab, and computer lab were all converted to classrooms. And I don't think anybody advocates, getting rid of those programs. So, what's interesting, if we could go back, Chris, to the previous slide, because the reduced growth is 5,700. So if we're somewhere in the middle, if we're at 63, 64, 6,500, does that justify another elementary school before 34, 35? Time will tell. Or do we look at getting Currington up to 800 and possibly building some pre-K, couple of classrooms for pre-K, adding 30 or 40 for a number of these schools be a heck of a lot cheaper. So it's just something to consider. We're going to have to look at these numbers on an ongoing basis, and these reports will change every 2 years. But that's a pretty wide gap between reduced growth at 5,700. Now, granted, that assumes charter schools coming in, more private schools, slower rate of growth. And we've been averaging somewhere between the two, the projection and the slower, somewhere in the middle. So it's just going to be interesting to see where things end up. But I don't see, based on this, I don't see some massive building, a program.
Concern, right, in the short term.
I mean, but I just like some clarification. If we're going to look at this baseline, can we get a hammer down on what actually is the baseline? Because I'm looking at how many schools that are 70% or less occupancy and kids are in portables. Yeah.
So, Dr. Hare, I don't know if you want to mention any of that.
Sure. So at the elementary level, so they're using the capacity numbers that we provide them. PASA is. We provide them PEIMS data from our snapshot data. We provide them our capacity numbers. Our capacity numbers that you see on this slide for elementary schools have been the same capacity numbers that we've used for elementary schools for the last 3 years that I've been here. They're static. It's a little bit of a combination. They start in the operations department with a square footage calculation, but then we also look at what the rooms are used for. Elementary capacity is actually, I'm going to oversimplify it a little bit, but if you think about it, kindergarten classroom through second grade classroom, 22 kids in a classroom, right? Fifth grade classroom, 25 kids in a classroom. So you can take the number of available classrooms in K through 4 and multiply times 22. You can take the number of fifth grade classrooms, multiply times 25, and add them together. And that is where all the kids are at one given time, right? So what you don't add in that space is you don't add in the library, you don't add in the gym, you don't add in the cafeteria in that square footage calculation. So these numbers align fairly well with the number of available classroom spaces that are in those particular buildings. We have fewer classrooms at Curington than we do in our other buildings, which is why you see that 700 capacity as opposed to the 800. And it does not add like the temporary building space that we have on the outsides. It does not include that in those numbers, right? And so you can tell like I use Fair Oaks as a good bellwether, right? Where you see that they are sitting there, right there at near full the whole time, right? Van Rob, you see there is near full at the full time. And both of those campuses, we have temporary buildings outside that we use to kind of alleviate a little bit of those spaces. And sometimes that's because we're using a classroom space for like a PLC room instead of a classroom. That's why we're still using that temporary space in that campus.
Am I mistaken? Because I remember looking at the numbers from last year, and my memory is not the best, so I'm definitely available to make mistakes. But I could have sworn we had Fair Oaks was just a little bit over 100% capacity, not much, but a little bit over. Fabra was touching it as far as going over. Curington was getting close to there. I'm trying to look through the numbers here, though. Van Rob was right there as well. I mean, we're seeing 95%. I knew that they were getting over it too, and that was kind of when we were talking about Viola Wilson and the what that would take on. This is just I know I've seen numbers where the majority of our campuses were at 700, and I believe we had like Cibolo was well below. Was one of the smaller capacities. Am I?
So the capacities have remained the same in the reports that you've seen from us the last several years. The shading on the chart has changed over time depending on two things. One, what we've done with the campuses for programmatically, and then also what PASS has done with adjusting their projections, right? So you'll see the shading, you can see even from their moderate scenario to their reduced scenario where the shading kind of gets pushed off to the right? And that's part of that because you're looking at a different student yield per house when that happens. And then like Cibolo, when we add the Spanish immersion program to Cibolo, it's programmatically, we've arbitrarily increased their student count because that program now is an application program where students from all of our ISDs can apply. And so we've done that on purpose in order to better maximize that building.
So Dallas, over the last few years, those capacity numbers haven't changed. I can go back and look at other presentations that we've done, but every year we get data. This is the year when we have a full, robust report. In the off years, we have a smaller version of the same report. But we can also take a look at which campuses have temporary buildings and what are they used for versus where we see utilization here. Okay. Any other questions?
Where I think we have an opportunity over the coming 5, 6, 7, 8 years is with tweaking our attendance zones is until the last decade, almost all of our schools were within the city limits of Boerne. Boerne is 12 square miles. The district is 360 square miles. So you had all these folks from outlying areas coming into the city. So really where our elementary schools are positioned, it does lead to the possibility of making minor adjustments and tweaks to the attendance zones so that we avoid a 65%, which is the case right now with Cibolo Creek. It's got a lot of room. All you have to do is look at this and say, well, golly gee, there's subdivisions that feed into HERF. Should they be zoned to Cibolo Creek? And I'm not suggesting that we get into a big debate on zoning right now, because that's always controversial. My only point is that I think we've got a lot of options in how we structure our attendance boundaries.
Okay, and then we'll wrap this up. I know we're kind of running long here, but we'll wrap up here with just the middle schools and the high schools. It's kind of a similar thing. We're going to look basically at the same sorts of maps and tables. This first one shows the three middle school attendance zones, and they're color-coded based on the increase over time, with Bernie South having the largest increase of greater than 500 students over the 10 years. Bernie North coming in next, mainly because of how its attendance zone stretches down toward the south. And then Voss still growing. I mean, there's no blue on this one, just like there was no blue on the elementary map either. And so the thing that we'll have to watch, though, there is no space for portables across the street. And so that Bernie North number is going to be very important for you guys. So when we're looking at the utilization levels, of course, what we're seeing here first is Voss having the lower utilization level. So maybe we can relieve Bernie North into Voss a little bit, just like we're talking about here. And then at that midpoint there, we're still in pretty good shape with nobody really in bright red. We've barely got a little bit of overage in North, and we've got a little bit of overage in South. But by the end of the projection period, those numbers get pretty big. And so I'm sure that you can see that another facility is probably going to be needed before the end of the projection period. Based on that moderate scenario of growth, we're looking at Bernie North could be 133% of capacity, and South would be 151. And so when we put your transfers in, again, you don't have a ton of transfers. I think the largest was maybe 50 students in between there. Bless you. But what you have is the two, Bernie North and Bernie South, showing up in red. We're projecting just over 4,000 students there with a capacity figure of about 3,400 students. And so you can see that a school of about 1,200 kiddos would probably take care of that based on that primary scenario of growth. And when we go and we drop that down just a little bit, we've still got pressure at Bernie South. It's at 123% and Bernie North at 116. But by and large, we're projecting about 3,400 middle school students, and you got about 3,400 seats. And so under that reduced scenario, you probably need a facility. You need to certainly be thinking about a facility over time, but maybe you're going to have a little bit more time if things do trend a little lower. And then at the high school level, this is actually where you have the most number of kiddos transferring back and forth. It's about 171 from Champion into Bernie, and you've got a smaller capacity at Bernie than you do at Champion. But you can see that the largest amount of growth at greater than 500 would be there in Champion. And so when we're looking at a utilization level at the 5-year time frame, based on residents only, not the transfers, we'd have Champion at 100%. And then by the end of the projection period, Champion at about 120%. But when we include those transfers and we have students going into Bernie from Champion, both of them are over, but only by a little. We're looking at about 104% at Bernie and 114 at the end of the projection period in Champion. And the good news is not over at all until that second half of the projection period here. About 4,500 students of capacity and about 5,000 or so high school students projected here. And then under that reduced scenario, all of that color basically goes away because we would be looking at a capacity of 4,500 students and about 4,200 that were projected. And so then just to wrap it up a little bit, the things that key kind of takeaways, aging of your student population, you did have that bulge moving through, so that's something to always remember. Students from new housing, we've talked about that. It's overall yielding lower, and in the brand new housing, also lower than that. Births, still going up, but that doesn't always mean kindergarten results from births. And so those are two things that will have to be watched. And then those pesky alternative educational opportunities, something that we all have to be watching perpetually every single day of the week to understand how that's going to impact you guys.
Thank you. I've been hanging on to every word. This is a lot of information, and I just want to thank y'all for your diligence. And
Sure, absolutely.
I guess, once we see who's going to take advantage or try to take advantage of the ESAs, then we will be able to document who's homeschooled at that point? You said there's no documentation for homeschoolers at this point, but that could change.
For anybody who tries to get that $2,000 break for those, yes.
And so when are you predicting that, and this may be a Dr. O'Hare question, that we'll have an idea of how many people in our community are applying for that?
The applications, I think the deadline is coming up pretty quickly. The last number I heard was 130,000 statewide. That means it's going to get kicked into a lottery. And so I know that there was another deadline of May the 6th to have all of the rules and everything broken out. There is an extensive write-up as best we know it today, and this write-up has changed like in the last 9 days or something about all of that. As for the awards themselves, I don't know when we will get that sort of information. I don't know that we will be able to get that sort of information.
Okay.
I highly suspect we will not. And what will occur is that we will have to come and see how many people show up in the fall.
Okay.
And I've also been reading that parents may be getting notification in May, in June, over the summer. And so those will be developments that we'll have to be following all summer long to be tracking what kind of activity we're seeing for the district.
And then, but there's a mismatch there between that and the enrollment dates for a lot of the private schools. You know, re-enrollment dates for private schools a lot of times are like in February. And so they may be having to apply at one point, but not know if they have the money until June, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're going to see how this all works out. If the 130,000, even if they get the award, is it going to be enough? Because it's been, you know, cut down by a certain amount, and the private schools have been able to increase their capacity or their tuition. So there's an awful lot at play still.
I was very satisfied with your margin of error the 2 years ago. I thought it was super close, and you know, thankfully we're not in a predicament that we have to close schools, because
Right.
that's even harder than having to open schools
Right.
and
Absolutely
rezone.
right.
So thank you. Anybody have questions?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how ESAs are handled statewide, because there were 130,000 applicants or families as of a few days ago, projected 100,000 ESA scholarships available. How many of those are already in private school? How many of those are already homeschooled? So it's going to be interesting to see where the money really is going. And I suspect before there's any massive expansion, there's going to be a demand for accountability to where the money's gone. You know, is it really helping low-income kids in poor-run school districts to get a choice for education? So we'll see that. But, you know, so much of it depends on whether we reach the projection or whether we have the slower rate or if it's somewhere in the middle. And we're not going to really know that for 3, 4, 5 years, which is why, as you mentioned earlier, 10-year forecasts are difficult.
Right.
2 to 3 year forecasts are a lot easier. And you can kind of almost take those to the bank. So I don't really see any strong conclusions as to when we should be looking at expanding our facilities from this. Just that if we get the lower rate of growth, we're in pretty darn good shape. If we get the projected rate of growth, we're going to have to do some stuff, you know.
But not tomorrow.
Not
That
tomorrow,
is
right.
the good news, right.
Anybody else have a question or comment?
More slides.
Oh, sorry. Mr. Scott?
Could you pass over the clicker? Thank you.
All right. Well, we're going to go over a couple of things. You know, we haven't released any of our budget assumptions at this point in time, and we're not going to today, but we're going to give you some background leading up to that. Here is a comparison of for the past 5 years of what's happened with PEAMS, and compared to PASS's low and moderate projections. And so, you know, we would have adopted the moderate in 21-22 and come in substantially under that in 22-23. It was the low was pretty close to what actually came in. In 23-24, I believe we split. That was at the year that we kind of split the difference, John, between the low and the moderate, and still came in a little bit below. 24-25 is one that was really close where we adopted. No, that was the year that we split the difference, and came in right on target. And what we're looking at right now is coming in about 50 students below the low projection. So keeping that in mind, this is just a reminder we adopted the low enrollment for PASA this year for the 25-26 budget year at 11,237. We did ADA at 94% of that enrollment at 10,562. Where we're at right now through 25-26 is an ADA of 95.99%. Very comparable to last year through the third 6 weeks. And remember, goofy little West things when I talk about ADA as a percentage of enrollment, that's a different calculation from what TA recognizes. So that TA's calculated ADA, that percentage is always going to be a little bit higher. It's just a little bit simpler when we're talking about budget numbers where you can connect the dots between enrollment and ADA. Suffice to say that ADA through the third 6 weeks, even though we're a little bit below the projected enrollment, right now I'm still projecting based on ADA through those third 6 weeks that we're coming in this year in the 10,550s. It's not going to be enough of a difference where I would even recommend a budget amendment off of that. Okay.
All right, so we're in the middle of budget development season, and understanding our projections is very important because it will be informing the projections we use for staffing. And so we always make data-informed decisions. Tonight, we received great information on our projections for the next school year. And so the team will be looking at this data and reconvening with a few folks and setting our projections so that we can start to build out plans for next school year. So we have spring break coming up next week. We have our March board meeting, March 23rd. We'll come back again in April for a budget workshop. Ms. Flores will lead the discussion there on academic programming updates for the next school year, and we will just continue to work through the budget cycle.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Scott. Thank you, Dr. Kraft. Thank you, PASA team. Anybody else have anything for the class? All right. Yes, great presentation. All right, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Rich Senna, second by Sarah Falkenberry. Meeting